Hello, my name is Ezekiel Ray, and today we're going to go over a comparative analysis of the urban histories of Chicago and Rio de Janeiro. In this presentation, the topics we're going to cover are economic foundations, migration and demographics of both Chicago and Rio de Janeiro, political and policy decisions that have shaped the cities, the rural to urban transitions of both cities, their global influences. We're going to highlight some similarity and differences of the city. We're going to take a view of how Gardiner and Glasser may interpret both cities. And then finally, we end with my personal reflection on the analysis of both cities. First, let's go into the economic foundations of Chicago and Rio de Janeiro. For Chicago, it was first settled in 1790 as a trading post. It was founded in 1837 as a city. The city was known for beef, grain, and its extensive transportation hub, both by boat and rail. This evolved into the era and then into financial services as the city grew into the future. For Rio de Janeiro, the city was a major hub of the slave trade in the Americas. They were under heavy Portuguese rule in the 1800s, so much so much so that the Portuguese transferred their government to Rio de Janeiro in 1807. The city was the capital of the most important colony in the Portuguese Empire. The city also experienced a boom in global trade under Portuguese rule, including the export of coffee, a locally abundant commodity. Now, as we look at the migration and demographic changes of both cities, Chicago was a pipeline for the Underground Railroad. And during the Reconstruction era, after the Emancipation Proclamation, it saw a large migration of blacks to the cities. The 1940s, 50s, and 60s saw large migrations of blacks from the South to the North. Chicago black population grew by 77% in the 40s, another 65% in the 50s, and had more than a half a million more black residents in the 60s than in the previous 2 decades. The city was also a hub for European settlement, including Polish, Italian, and Irish. Rio de Janeiro in the 1800s saw a large influx of Portuguese citizens due to Portuguese colonization. They migrated to the land in search of job opportunities as well as continual movement of the African slaves in the African slave trade. Now we'll look at political and policy decisions that shaped both cities. For Chicago, it was a strategic location. Chicago's political scene has always been a ferocious and tough one. To be a successful politician in the city, you had to appeal to a wide array of ethnic background, given Chicago's diverse ethnic heritage and large number of foreign-born residents. Chicago has all but been run by the Democratic Party since the early mid 1900s. Now, through the Prohibition period, when it was outlawed to have alcohol in the United States, Chicago was a major actor in the legal bars, speakeasy, and the transportation of alcohol. Best characterized by the large influence the mob and the likes of characters such as Al Capone had on the city. This spurred violence throughout the city and established Chicago as a city that contained a large criminal syndicate which continues today, with all the issues with violence and gangs that still plague the city. Now we look at Rio de Janeiro. Brazil gained its independence from Portugal in 1822, and the abolition of the Brazilian slave trade ended in 1850. Although slavery ended, much like the southern U.S. Jim Crow period, darker skinned Brazilians continue to face discrimination in all facets of life. Now let's look at the rural to urban transition. Chicago was founded in 1837 and was unrecognizable as the metropolis it would later become due to its vast fields, lack of buildings, and very few people. Over the next century, it became a bustling industrial town, a central hub of commerce in the United States. The Great Chicago Fire occurred in October of 1871, This caused significant infrastructure damage, but also presented an opportunity to rebuild the city. Next, we look at Rio. Rio de Janeiro was first inhabited by the Portuguese in 1502. Over the next few centuries, it would become a key city in the Portuguese Empire, to include being a major trade hub for gold, coffee, and other commodities. The city was also the capital of Brazil from 1763 to 1960. Then the capital switched to Sao Paulo. Although no longer the capital, Rio de Janeiro continued to grow as a hub for tourism, business, and trade. Post World War II saw a major shift from an agricultural to industrial city. Now we look at their global influence. Chicago has been considered a world-class city since the 1800s. Known as a hub for commerce and trade, the city has grown, survived, and thrived amid destruction and adversity. The city stands at the cutting edge of the tech world: car manufacturing, food, finance, art, and education. Chicago has significant importance to both the United States and the world for its rich history and ongoing contributions through innovation and trade. When it comes to Rio de Janeiro, it was a key factor in Portugal's colonial kingdom and had global significance due to its trade in commodities and its location on the Atlantic coast. Furthermore, the city remains a major hub in the country for tourism, commerce, art, and industry. Now let's look at the similarities and differences of both cities. Chicago and Rio. Both of these cities share many similarities in their development. Both were and remain major economic powerhouses. They share a vibrant art scene. Equally, both have dealt with racism towards their black citizenry and were major trade posts during their inception. Unfortunately, also what is true for both cities is crime and poverty. These two cities also share the fact that they are both world-class cities that span the full spectrum of the socio-economic scale. Throughout the history of both cities, they have dealt with a high violent crime rate and dense concentrations of ghettos or favelas. Now let's look how these two cities differ from each other. Both cities differ significantly in their governance during the early years. Chicago was part of the United States at its inception, while Rio de Janeiro was ruled by the Portuguese, becoming the most important location in the Portuguese Empire outside of Portugal. Also, very different in both cities, they were polar opposites on the slave trade spectrum. Rio de Janeiro was a major hub for the Atlantic slave trade and sits on the Atlantic River. In juxtaposition, Chicago was considered a free state where slaves on the run from the American South often found refuge. It was also an inland city with rivers and great lakes far from the sea. Now, let's take a look at Gardiner and Glasser. Now, let's take a look how Gardiner would have looked at both cities. Gardiner would have looked at both cities and see that the capitalistic spirit had driven growth, making both major hubs of commerce. But that would have come at a cost, the cost of life and happiness for all. In both cities, it created a wedge between the rich and the poor, and the wealthier the rich became, the poorer the impoverished became. And then taking a socio-spatial view of both cities, the histories and their people influence each other. Businesses and governance influenced the formation and growth of the cities, and in turn, it affected the people. Likewise, those who migrated to the city had a great effect on the politics of the city, the growth of the city, and what became important to the cities. This inspired more growth, more planning, and established these cities from the plains they were into the metropolis they became. The natural location of both cities created an environment where they could thrive in a market that were ever changing and always seeking the next thing. This has helped both cities sustain themselves through adversity, calamity, and change. However, it has also created a great disparity in the have and the have nots. And although both cities have grown and been through adversity, they also have grown in inequality and poverty. Look at how Glasser would have taken his perspective on both cities. He would say that both cities are great examples of the magic that can occur when people densely gather together to share thoughts, innovation, and space. These cities are an example of what it looks like when the messiness of human lives comes together to create something beautiful. Could the tall buildings, sports teams, and fantastic food have come into being if people were not together to come up with such plans? Both cities show the beauty not only in the diversity of ideas, but also in the diversity of people. Equally, he would look at the environmental impact. Although it appears both cities have created large pockets of inequality, it has actually created opportunities for those less fortunate to live in places that offer them a chance at a better life. In turn, it is also better for the environment as both cities are less car dependent due to their bustling public transportation system and the fact that everything you need can be within walking distance. Now it's time that I reflect. When it comes to which city's history better fits Glasser's optimistic view of the cities as engines of progress, I believe Chicago would best fit his view, especially given that it recovered from a devastating fire that become one of the world's major cities. Chicago has sparked many inventions and has been a driver of innovations for well over 100 years. Now, when it comes to a city that illustrates Gardner's critique of inequality and power, Rio de Janeiro will be a great example of these, especially given its history with the slave trade, colonial rule, and the current presence of its favelas. Now, the lessons we can draw from why some cities thrive while others decline, I would say, is cities can only survive if the people find worth in them. Although cities seem to offer experiences, food, entertainment, work, and community on their own, they are all operated and sustained by human capital. Those in power and government can shape a city's growth, but ultimately, a city must present itself as worth living in or fighting for. If interest is lost, power becomes too lopsided, or the expense becomes too high relative to what is received. A city can find itself in a steep decline. Throughout my readings, one thing is consistent. Cities offer resilience and a fighting chance in what seems to be a dying world. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to my presentation. Here are some of my references.